Once upon a time, there was a man who believed he was stronger than anyone else in the world. He certainly was strong, for wherever he, he went to the forest to get firewood for his home, and he would bring back a load 10 times as big as most men could carry. And sometimes when he found a dead tree lying on the ground, he would toss it onto his head with a mighty heave and carry it home in one piece. But he was proud too, and when he reached home, he would burst triumphantly into his compound, fling down the load on the ground, and call to his wife, "Come and see what your Superman has brought you." His wife would bend low as she came out of the door of her hut, straighten her back, and smile. "Superman," she would mock. "Do you really think if you saw a Superman you would run away from him? Don't talk to me of Superman. Strong you may be, but Superman, no." Then the man would get angry and sit down under a cassia tree outside his hut, muttering, "It's a lie. I am a Superman. Just show me another who is stronger than I. Then I will believe you when you say I am not a Superman." One day the man's wife, whose name was Shetu, went to draw water. She took a large calabash, put it on her head, and walked along the winding bush path until she came to a well. Now, this was a magic well, and although Shetu managed to throw the bucket down into the water, she could not pull it up. She hauled and she tugged and she heaved, leaning backwards and digging her heels into the ground as she put her whole weight into the task. She even called upon Allah to help her, but all to no avail. "Alas," she said, sinking down to the mud beside the well and wiping the perspiration from her forehead with the hem of her skirt, 10 men would be needed to raise that bucket from the well today. I must go home without any water." Sadly, she rose to her feet and began the journey back along the dusty path that would wound in and around between the forest trees. Suddenly, she saw another woman approaching, and they stopped to exchange greetings. "Why are you returning from the well with your calabash empty?" said the stranger. "Has the well dried up?" "Oh no," exclaimed Shetu. "I have been struggling for a long time to raise the bucket from the water, but it is too heavy, and I am not strong enough. It needs at least 10 men to bring it to the top." The other woman smiled and said, "Do not despair. Come, follow me to the well, and I will see that you get your water after all." Shetu was sure that the other woman would not be able to help her, but decided to follow to prove the truth of her words. As the woman went back on the way along the path, Shetu noticed a fine-looking baby tied on her back. She turned her head and stared at her with bright, unblinking eyes for ever so long that she began to feel uncomfortable under the gaze. At length they reached the well, and Shetu showed the woman the long rope which extended far down into the well with the magic bucket on the end. "See," she began. "I threw the bucket down, but could not raise it up. I feared you will not be able to either." The woman laughed, untied the child from her back, and told him to pull the bucket up from the well. Without faltering, the child seized the rope in his fat little hands and pulled the bucket up easily, as if there had been a feather at the end of a piece of string. Shetu put her hand to her mouth in astonishment. She could not speak, for the woman did not seem at all disconcerted, and told her child to draw more water, which she did again and again, without any sign of strain. The two women set to work, washing first themselves and then the clothes they were wearing. They soon dried in the hot sun. Then they filled the calabash with water and began their journey homeward. After a while they came to a place where another path branched off to the east, and the woman with the baby turned up this new track. "Where are you going?" asked Chetu. "Home, of course," replied the other. "Is your home along the path?" said Chetu. "I did not know that led to a village. What is your husband's name?" "My husband's name is Superman," said the stranger, and walking quickly along the narrow track, she soon disappeared into the forest. Chetu was too amazed to speak, but as soon as she got back to a hut, she told her husband all that had happened during the day. At first, he would not believe her, but soon he realized that she was speaking the truth, and anger welled up in him like bubbles rising in a pot of broth. "Alas," he exclaimed, "so there is another man who calls himself Superman, is there? Just let me see him, that's all. I'll soon show him who is the real Superman in these parts." "Oh no," begged the wife. "Keep away from him in Allah's name, for I am sure he will destroy you, and then what will you become of me? If you had the strength of his infant son, you would realize that the father must be 50 times as strong." But there was nothing she could say that would persuade her obstinate husband to give up his foolish idea. Husband gave up his obstinate to give up his foolish idea. "Early tomorrow morning," he said firmly, "you must take me to the path that leads to this man's house." So the next day, the husband got up before dawn, and full of confidence, took his hunting weapon from their hiding place. With a quiver of sharp arrows on his back, his bow in his hand, and his trusty sword slung along from his shoulder, he felt ready for anything. Then he shouted to his terrified wife, "Come along, lazy bones! Come out of that hut and lead me to the place where this impostor lives." "No, wait!" he exclaimed. "First of all, take me to this magic well, that I may set the bucket for myself." The woman picked up her calabash, placed it on her head, and led the way to the well. She was far too worried to realize how foolish it was to take a vessel to a well from which neither of them would be able to draw water. But she hurried along the path, and with her husband still shouting at her from the rear. Presently she noticed that there was another figure on the path in front, and when she and her husband reached the well, they found the other woman and her baby son were there too. Chetu greeted them and her husband, ignored them, and began to peer down into the well, straining her eyes to catch sight of the water at the bottom. "Give me that bucket," he stormed, and snatching it from the ground beside the well, he threw it with all his strength down into the dark cavity, where they all heard it strike the water with a resounding splash. "Oh, put pay to this nonsense once and for all," he boasted, and he began to haul on the rope. 10 men indeed! Ha! Watch me pull the bucket up." He grunted and groaned and swore and sweated, but then the bucket would not come up. Frustrated, he leaned further and further into the well, cursing the bucket and the rope and the water so heartily that he forgot to keep his foot anchored against the rim of the well, and all but tumbled in after the bucket. Just in time, the baby boy reached his hand over the cloth that tied him to his mother's back, and seized both the rope and the man, and whisked the man and the bucket safely out of the well with never a word. The man sat on the ground in dazed surprise, rubbing his head and watching the child, who had clambered down from his mother's back, pull up bucket after bucket of cold, clear water while his mother filled the water pot. Then Shattu turned to him triumphantly. Now that you have seen what the son of a real Superman can do, are you not afraid to meet the Superman himself? The man had been silently wondering how he could get out of his visit to the real Superman's compound, but since his wife had shamed him by suggesting that he would be afraid, he had to put on a brave face on other things. So he said stubbornly, rubbing his bruised head, I'm more determined than ever to go and see this so-called Superman. Right. Then you go alone, said Shattu. And seizing her calabash, which the child had filled with water, she placed it on her head and hurried away from the well. The other woman turned doubtfully to the man. So you want to see my husband, do you? She said to the man. You'd better not. You'd be far better off not to if you went home. But he would not listen, and presently the woman fastened her baby on her back again and led the way through the forest. At last they reached the woman's compound. It looked much the same as any other home, and there was nothing to show that it belonged to a Superman, so the man's courage began to return. My husband, the Superman, is away hunting in the forest, explained the woman. You cannot hide somewhere until he comes back, and then you can peep out and look at him. But do not let him see you. He eats men like you. Ha, said the man, I'm not afraid. There's no need for me to hide. What if I tell you that my husband ate a whole elephant for breakfast today, and that he has been known to eat 10 elephants at one sitting, asked the woman. Are you not then afraid, oh foolish little man? So the man let her lead him to a corn bin that stood on the edge of the compound. It was made of mud and looked rather like an outsized water pot. And when the man had climbed into the opening at the top, he found he could see over the edge only by standing on tiptoe. Now, keep quiet if you value your life, admonished the woman as she left him. I must cook my husband's supper. Towards evening, the man in the corn bin heard the sound like an approaching tornado. A great wind began to shake the forest trees, and then lift the thatch from the nearby huts. Then into the clearing around the compound came the master of the house. As he spoke, the air throbbed with the power of his voice, and his feet shook the ground like an earthquake. Wife, wife, he called, have you cooked my elephant? Indeed I have, replied the woman. Come and see whether this one is big enough for your supper. The man in the corn bin cowered with fright. So it was true. There was, after all, another more worthy of the name of Superman. How did he hope with all his heart that the elephant that the woman had cooked was big enough? He stood trembling while he heard the Superman eating his supper and cracking elephant bones like sticks of sugar cane. I'll grant the elephant is a big one, he murmured again and again between his chattering teeth. Time passed until when the sky was dark and night had come, the real Superman began to shout, Wife, wife, I smell the smell of a man. Where is he, that I may eat him? Good husband. I am the one whom you can smell, she replied. There is no one here but me. But she found it difficult to satisfy her husband. Then there was no one hidden in the compound. He prowled about, shaking the place with his shouts and heavy footsteps, while the man in the corn bin nearly died of fright. At last the Superman left the compound and began to search in the nearby forest land, roaring all the while. I smell the smell of a man. As soon as he was gone, the woman crept to the corn bin and whispered to the terrified man within, "Oh, why did you not believe me from the first? What a lot of trouble we should both have saved." "Alas, I'm truly sorry," said the foolish man, "but how could I believe such a thing unless I saw it with my own eyes? And how can I escape from this place?" "Now listen," whispered the woman. "Soon my husband will return for the night. Watch the door of our hut, and when my husband is fast asleep, I will put my little lamp outside. Then you must make haste and escape, and never come back here again." "Thank you, thank you," the man said, trembling violently as he felt the wind blow across the compound, heralding the return of the Superman.
That's okay, that's okay.
The hours passed slowly, but the man dared not sleep. Then at last, just before dawn, he saw a tiny flickering light, like the firefly at the door of the house. Carefully, he swung himself up onto the rest of the corn bin and let himself down to the ground without a sound. Then he began to run, and how he did run! Never had he taken to his feet such long strides, or his heart beat so quickly. Just when he thought he was safe, he heard the roars of a Superman in the distance, and his heart sank, and while he felt sick with fright, "I smell the smell of a man," shouted the voice he had learned to dread. The poor man ran faster and faster until he came to a field where some men were clearing the ground to make a farm. They stopped their task of unburdening bushes and felling trees and inquired, "Hey, where are you going? Who are you chasing you that you run so fast?" "Someone who calls himself Superman is chasing me," repeated the runner. "Can you help me?" "There are several of us here," replied the man. "Stay with us until this so-called Superman catches you up, and we'll deal with him." The man crouched, panting on the ground, when suddenly a mighty wind roars so strongly that it lifted all the laborers off the ground and several yards away. "Here," they called in fright, "what's happening to us?" "It's that Superman," exclaimed the terrified fugitive. "He puffs and blows so strongly that with such great wind precedes him." "If that's the case, we're no match for him," said the man, now terrified in their turn. "You'd better keep on running." So the man leapt to his feet in fear and began his race. Presently he came to another group of men who were hoeing up the ground in preparation for planting. They straightened up and looked at him in amazement. "Hey, where are you going? Who is chasing you that you run so fast?" they shouted. "Someone who calls himself Superman is chasing me," puffed the man. "Can you help me?" The man laughed. "There are a ton of us here," he said. "Surely we can deal with your so-called Superman. Stay with us until he catches you up." The man collapsed gratefully on the heap of earth and tried to get his breath back. Then the men who were hoeing found themselves blown about by a strong wind, which tumbled them higgledy-piggledy all over the farm. "Here," he said, "what's happening to us?" "It's that Superman," said the man desperately. "He puffs and he blows so strongly that a great wind precedes him. In that case, we're no match for such a man," said the men who'd been hoeing. "You'd better keep on running." And they lay flat on their faces, hoping that the Superman would not see them as he passed by. By now the poor man, who was nearly dead with fatigue, but with a great effort he managed to drag himself to his feet and continued to run away from the Superman, even faster than before. Presently he came to another group of men who were planting guinea corn seeds in a patch of ground already cleared and hoed. "Hey, where are you going?" they called in surprise. "Who's chasing you that you run so fast?" Someone who calls himself Superman is chasing me, replied the poor fellow in a weak voice. Can you help me? Well, there are a dozen or more of us here, replied one of the men. I don't think a Superman would bother us much. Stay with us until he catches you up. The man staggered and fell, too exhausted to say more. But after a few moments, a mighty wind came. It lifted up the men who were sewing, whirled them around in the air, and cast them on the ground in a heap. Hey, they gasped. What's happening to us? It's that Superman, exclaimed the runner in despair, knowing full well that it would be the outcome. Then you better keep on running, said the frightened men, and they dropped their long planting hoes and handfuls of seed and ran helter-skelter into the forest to hide. The man thought his end had come, but rousing himself to make one last effort, he ran on. Suddenly, as they rounded a bend in the path, he now saw in the distance what looked like a huge man sitting under a baobab tree, his enormous legs stretched out beside him in the path. I've dodged a wasp, only to run into a hornet, he thought, as he tried to hide behind a bush. But no, nothing can be worse than the fate that will befall me if I stop running. When he reached the baobab tree, he found that it was indeed a gigantic man sitting there, indeed surrounded by roasted elephants, which he was hungrily eating and throwing their huge bones away over his shoulder into the forest. Stop, he boomed. Who's chasing you, that you run so fast? The exhausted man fell in a heap at the giant's feet and panted. Someone who calls himself Superman is chasing me. Can you help me? Of course I can, boomed the giant. I am Giant of the Forest. Stay with me until he catches you up. Suddenly the wind, made by the puffings and blowings of the Superman, lifted our poor man from the ground and twirled him round and round in the air. Then he fell down some distance away from the giant. Come back, called the Giant of the Forest. Don't you want me to help you? I couldn't stop myself, said the man. It's the breath of that Superman. But the giant did not seem at all put out. He laughed kindly and said, give me your hand. I will sit on it. And then the breath of this so-called Superman cannot blow you away. There they sat, and the man's arm blew you away. So the Superman's arm can't blow you away. There they sat, and the Superman's arm was almost crushed by the weight of the giant, until Superman came rushing up to them. He was in a fine temper. Give me that man, he bellowed to the giant. He's mine. I want to eat him. Come and take him, said the giant, grinning horribly. The Superman leapt at the giant and rose to his feet and began to fight with him. They leapt, they stamped, they struggled and wrestled, and twisting their legs together, each trying to throw the other to the ground. Then with a mighty leap they endeavored to loosen each other's grip. So mighty was the leap that they too rose together far into the heaven and disappeared from sight. The man could not believe his luck at first, but he soon came to his senses. He slipped quietly into the forest and began another long trace to his home. When he got back, his wife was delighted to see him, for she had never expected to set eyes on him again. He told her all about his alarming adventures and tried to show himself in the light of a hero. But his wife would have none of it. Let that be a lesson to you, he called callously. Never boast about your achievements again. However strong or clever, or rich or powerful you are, there is always someone more so. And the man had to admit that she was right. And so the real Superman and the Giant of the Forest to this day are still have their wrestling in the heavens. When they are tired, they sit on a cloud to recover their strength. But soon they rise up again and continue the struggle. And if you will listen carefully, you will sometimes hear them fighting. People may tell you it is thunder, but you will know it is really Superman and the giant of the forest, wrestling high above the clouds.